What's up, guys? Justin here with TheSketchUpEssentials.com, back with another SketchUp beginner tutorial for you. So in today's video, I'm going to teach you how to get started with the desktop version of SketchUp, SketchUp Pro. So there are multiple different versions of SketchUp. There's a free online version, there's a paid online version, and there's a paid desktop version called SketchUp Pro. So we are going to focus in this tutorial on SketchUp Pro. If you're looking for tutorials for the free online version, I will link to a playlist of those in the notes down below. In addition, if you're having any trouble picking between the different versions, I will also link to a video down below giving you more information on how you can choose between the different ones so you can figure out what's going to be the best fit for you. But for now, let's go ahead and just jump into it. Alright, so when you first open up SketchUp 2021, you're going to get a window that looks something like this. This is basically your welcome page where you can select different things like the template that you're going to use in your model. You can see some recent files, and you can also manage your license information on this page. For now, you don't need to worry too much about this. Probably the only thing you need to worry about is the template file that you pick. All of these are adjustable once you get into SketchUp, so I would say for now, just pick one that has the units that you want, whether it's imperial or metric, and we can talk more about these in a future video. For now, I'm just going to open up a template with inches as my units. So when you first open up SketchUp Pro 2021, your page is going to look something like this. It might be a little different because I have a different default model in here, but generally it should look something like this. And so real quick, I just wanted to run you through the workspace, give you kind of an idea of where everything is located. So first off, the file bar at the top of the page, that's going to be where you manage basically everything. So this is going to be where you can open and save your files. You can import and export and print different things, other things like that. There's also tabs in here where you can access like camera information or your different drawing tools. So you can access a lot of different things from this file menu up at the top. Down below, you're going to have your toolbars section. So this is where you're going to have various different toolbars with different tools that you can use to do things in 3D. One thing to note about this is if you right click in the open space in here, you should get a drop down with additional toolbars. Notice I have a few more than you probably do because I have some third-party extensions installed. Don't worry too much about that for right now. For right now, we're going to focus on the native tools. One thing I do recommend for people though is I do recommend that they right click in this space and they go down and they turn on the large tool set. That's going to give you some additional tools on the left hand side of the page that we're going to use for different modeling things. The other thing you can do if you want to is you can right click in here and under the toolbars function, I usually uncheck the box for large icons because I like the smaller icons. You don't have to do that, but you can do that. So we're going to go ahead and hit close and keep moving. So one other thing to note about that is those toolbars can be moved around on your page by clicking and dragging them. So I can click and drag these to place them in my window. I can click them back up to dock them, or I can click the X in here to close them. If you ever close a toolbar and you want to get it back, you can just right click in this space and go down and just find that, and that'll bring it back. So these can move around on your page. So on the right hand side of your page, this is a little different for Mac users and PC users. For PC users, you're going to have a tray over here. It's basically a docked window on the right hand side that you can minimize and maximize these in order to see different things about your model. So this is where you're going to manage things like your materials or your tags, which turn things on and off so that you can see them, as well as your outliner, which is where you're going to organize things. So you can manage that for my PC users by going to Window, Default Tray, and you can hide or show your tray, and you can also check boxes in here to have more things show up on the right hand side of the page. Now for my Mac users, these are called windows, and they don't dock to the right hand side of your page. They just kind of like float around like windows. This is a Windows versus Mac operating system thing, which is why they're different. So you can just kind of stick those together and move them off to the side of your page, or if you have a second monitor, you can drag them off on that monitor as well. So one other thing to note about this is you can click and drag this and move it around in the PC version. So notice how you can dock this to different sides of your page just by clicking and dragging it over these little boxes. So if you do want to dock that to a different location, you can do that. So down at the bottom of the page, you have your status bar. So your status bar is going to give you information about your active tool. So you can see how this gives me instructions on what to do with the tool that I have active, as well as a measurements bar on the lower right-hand side of your page that's going to show you information about the tool that you have active. So notice that you don't click in this box even with tools active. It's more just an indicator of different things. So there's also some other things over here as well, like geolocation information and model credits that I'm not going to get too far into in this video. And then finally, we have our workspace. So our workspace is going to be where we're actually going to do our 3D work inside of SketchUp. So this is where you're going to draw, this is where you're going to orbit and fly around different things like that. So now let's talk a little bit about how to navigate in the SketchUp workspace. So if you pick these things up now, you're going to save yourself a lot of time in the future. So the first thing is this space is a 3D space, right? Meaning you can fly around different things. It has 3 different dimensions in here. So you're going to be navigating around in here a lot. And so one of the things that's going to be really important is having a 3-button mouse with a scroll wheel. And I'll show you why. So generally speaking, if you want to just very simply fly around in SketchUp, you can click on the Orbit tool. What that's going to do is that's going to activate this tool, and you can left click and drag inside of your model in order to orbit. So you've also got other tools in here like panning, which is going to allow you to move left, right, up, down, and the zoom tool, which is going to let you click and drag to move in and out inside of your model. However, all of those extra clicks really add up. And so what I recommend instead is if you use a 3-button mouse with a scroll wheel, what that's going to do is that's going to allow you to navigate much more quickly. So on the scroll wheel itself, you can actually click and hold that scroll wheel down. So that's going to be your middle mouse button, and you can drag your mouse while you're holding that scroll wheel down. What that's going to do is that's going to allow you to orbit inside of SketchUp without having to click up and activate a tool. So in addition, you can also zoom in and out by scrolling your mouse wheel up and down. So instead of having to click on the zoom tool right here, you can scroll your mouse up and down. Notice how when I do this, the view is zooming in based on where my cursor is. So if I put my mouse over here and I scroll out, you can see how it's going to scroll out based on that cursor location. If I move my mouse over here, scroll up, you can see how it's going to zoom in based on where my mouse is. So you can use your mouse location to really accurately zoom in and out inside of SketchUp. And then the last thing is, while you can hold the middle mouse button down and drag to orbit, if you hold the middle mouse button down and hold the Shift key on your keyboard, you can pan. So you can use this to really quickly navigate around inside of your model. So now that we have a general idea of how that navigation works, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the tools that we can use in order to draw inside of SketchUp. And so in its simplest way, the way that you can draw things inside of SketchUp is by activating a tool. Like let's say, for example, that we wanted to draw a line. You click on the tool to activate it, and then you do something inside of your viewport in order to draw in the viewport. So first thing, and I want to start off with this because it's very, very important, not only are there icons that you can click, but there are also keyboard shortcuts that you can type on your keyboard to activate different tools. You want to start learning the keyboard shortcuts as soon as possible because those are really going to affect how fast you're going to be when working in SketchUp. So for example, when you activate the line tool, you don't want to click up here, you want to tap the L key on your keyboard. So notice how when I tap the L key, my cursor turns into a pencil and I can come in here and I can draw a line. So by tapping keyboard shortcuts, you can activate the different tools inside of SketchUp that you want to use really quickly. So one thing I have done is I've put together a free keyboard shortcut guide that you can download, and you can actually print it off if you want to keep it next to your keyboard while you're trying to learn this. It's going to show you some of the keyboard shortcuts that you're going to use a lot of. So I will be uploading that at TheSketchUpEssentials.com/beginner. So if you want to download that keyboard shortcut guide, you can do that at TheSketchUpEssentials.com beginner. And so now let's talk a little bit about the way the tools work in SketchUp. So let's start with the line tool. So if I was to activate the line tool by tapping the L key on the keyboard, I want to take a look at what happens down here. So if you look in the lower left-hand corner, as soon as you activate a tool, it's going to give you an instruction, right? So what it tells you to do is it tells you to select a start point. So with the line tool, you're basically telling it where to start, right? And then if you move your mouse, notice how the instruction has changed, and now it tells you to select the endpoint or enter value. So what that means is that now I'm going to tell it where I want this to draw a line tool to, either by clicking or by typing in a value. And so one thing that's really, really important when you're working in SketchUp is you don't want to click and drag when you're drawing with tools, right? So when I activate the line tool, don't click and drag and then let up. What you want to do instead is you want to click and move your mouse. So notice how I've single clicked and now I can move my mouse around. And so the thing about that is now what I can do is I can move my mouse in a direction and I can type in a value. So let's say I wanted to draw a 7-foot line. Well, notice how I can move my mouse in any direction and this little length value is changing based on where my mouse goes. Well, if I move my mouse in the direction of this little green line right here and I type in a value of 7 foot and hit the enter key, what this is going to do is this is going to draw a 7-foot line in the direction that you had moved your mouse. So because you didn't click and drag, it allows you to do that. However, if you click and drag, right, like let's say I wanted to draw a 7-foot line and I clicked and dragged and I let up so that I could type that value on my keyboard, notice how it's already drawn the line. So it doesn't make this active so that you can actually type a value. And again, because a lot of people get confused about this, you're not actually typing a value in the box. The box is just an indicator of what is active. And then you can type in whatever you want. But notice how I didn't click in the box before typing in this value. And so we'll talk in a little bit about drawing in a certain direction. But now that we've drawn a couple edges, let's talk a little bit about faces. So let's draw a line from here to here, and then another line from here to here, like this. And notice how all I'm doing is I'm just moving my mouse and clicking. Well, right now, what I have in here is I have 2 edges. So if I select these 2 edges, or if I click on these, you can see how each one of them gets selected individually. Notice how you can see more information about this in the entity info box in the upper right-hand corner. So for example, if I click on this, it's going to show me the length of this edge. If I click on this, it's going to show me the length of this edge. Well, what happens if we draw another line from this point to this point? Well, notice what happens is SketchUp draws a face in between those lines. And so the reason for that is because SketchUp draws faces based on their edges. Meaning, if you have 3 or more coplanar edges, it's going to create a face. So let's say, for example, that we were to draw a line here, and then up. Let's say we were to draw a line here, and then we were to draw a line here, right? Well, if I orbit around, notice how what I have is I have 2 lines going up and 2 lines going across. But there's no face in here because these edges aren't on the same plane. And so because they're not on the same plane, SketchUp doesn't draw a face in there. However, if I was to draw a line from this corner to this corner, notice how SketchUp fills in a face here and it fills in a face here. And the reason for that is because as soon as I drew this line, I had 3 coplanar edges along this face, and I had 3 coplanar edges along this face. That means that SketchUp knew to draw a face in here. And so let's say something was deleted. So let's say, for example, that I was to click on this edge and hit the delete key. Well, notice how my face goes away, right? Well, all I need to do if I want that face to come back is just redraw the line across the edge. That works the same way over here. So let's say this face got deleted, right? Let's say I clicked on it, I hit the delete key, and now I have no more face in here. Well, all I have to do is just retrace over one of these edges and then click in order to fill that back in. So if you ever lose that, or if you ever lose an edge like this, all you have to do is just redraw one of those lines in order to get your face back. And so real quick, I don't want to get too far into this right now, but erasing things inside of SketchUp is really easy. So let's say I drew a rectangle with the rectangle tool, which we'll talk about in a second. You can either select something and hit the delete key to delete it, or there's also a tool in here called the erase tool, which erases edges or entities inside of the model. And so that's one thing that's important to note is the eraser tool, which I'm going to tap the E key to activate, doesn't erase faces. What it does instead is it erases edges. So if I was to click and drag across an edge, notice how as soon as I do this, this turns blue. And if I let my mouse up, it goes away. So the eraser tool can be used to erase out edges inside of your model really quickly. If you want to delete out faces, then you're going to have to select them and hit the delete key on your keyboard. And so notice how if I select a face inside of SketchUp, I get information about that face over in the entity info. So if you ever want to see like the area of a face, you can do that just by clicking on it inside of SketchUp. In addition, you can also select multiple objects by doing a shift click and clicking on multiple objects. And notice how this is additive, meaning that I'm seeing the overall length of all of those edges placed together. So by selecting different things or multiple things, you can see information about those things. And so let's talk just a little bit about inferencing, because what you might have noticed is you might have noticed that when we draw, we get a bunch of colors in here, right? So like if I move my mouse around with the line tool active, you might have noticed that if I move my mouse in this direction, it turns green. If I move it in this direction, it turns blue. If I move it in this direction, that turns red. That's what's known as axis inferencing. And what this is doing is this is indicating to us when you're drawing something along an axis. And that's really important because everything in SketchUp needs to be coplanar, meaning on the same plane in order for your faces to be selected. Let's say I draw a line right here and I move my mouse in the green direction. Notice how this kind of snaps to the green axis? That's SketchUp trying to figure out if you want to draw along that axis. Well, one thing you can do is you can hold the shift key to lock an inference inside of SketchUp. Alternatively, you can also, with the tool active, you can tap the left, right, or up arrow keys to lock to these different axes. So that's going to be really important because if you don't do this, so if you don't draw along the axes, so let's say I'm going to draw a box and then I'm going to mess it up. So I'm going to hold the shift key to lock this to the green axis, then I'm just going to draw this across. Well, let's say instead of doing that, let's say that we accidentally drew our line a little bit off axis, right? So let's say we drew it up just a little bit, and then we drew this in here. So if you didn't use the axis inferencing and you drew a line that wasn't along the axis, well, notice what's happening. You're not getting the face in here because your edges are no longer coplanar. And so what that means is that you're no longer going to have an edge, or you're no longer going to have a face that draws inside of SketchUp when you do this. So it's really important that when you draw, like let's say again that I was to use the line tool to draw a line. So you want to try to draw along the axes as much as possible to make sure that things are coplanar so that you don't run into this issue where things are up a little bit and your faces won't draw inside of your model. So one other thing you might have noticed is not only do you get linear inferences, meaning lines turning colors, but when you have a tool active like the line tool, so I'm going to tap the L key, you might have noticed that you also get little points like this. So those little points mean things too. So for example, if I mouse over this point right here, notice how I get a little green dot, and it tells me that if I was to draw right now, I would be drawing based on this endpoint. I could also mouse over this edge right here in order to get the midpoint. Or if I mouse over here, this is going to tell me that anything I draw is going to be on this face. So this is SketchUp basically visually indicating to you where you're drawing so that you don't accidentally draw something off axis. And so now let's talk just a little bit about going to 3D, and we could talk more about this in a future tutorial, but I want to talk about it just a little bit. So let's say, for example, that we were to draw a rectangle. So I'm going to tap the R key to activate the rectangle tool. So, and notice how there are tools in SketchUp that create shapes like this. So there's a rectangle tool, you can tap the C key to activate the circle tool. So there are tools in here that draw shapes in addition to just edges. But let's say we wanted this rectangle to go to 3D, right? So what we could do is we could come in here and draw along the blue axis some faces, right? And notice how I'm using inferencing to make sure everything lines up. But if I wanted this to be a box like this, I could do that just by manually drawing everything in. But the problem with that is drawing a shape like that is really time consuming, right? Like, it's super time consuming. It's going to take a lot of extra time to do things that way. And there's a much faster way to do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this over. We can talk more about those tools another time, but I'm just going to pick up the bottom of this object, make a copy. And so let's say I wanted to create another box like this one. Well, instead of drawing everything up like this, there's a tool called the push-pull tool. And what it does is it extrudes objects. So it basically takes a profile like this one and it takes it into 3D. So the way that it works, and you can find it over here or by tapping the P key on your keyboard, the way it works is you can tap P with a face selected, single click, move your mouse, and then single click again. Well, notice what that did is that created a 3D shape based on that profile right here really quickly. One of the cool things about that is you can also type in values to extrude to a certain distance. So let's say I selected this face, I tap the P key, and then I single click, and I move my mouse up. Well, let's say I wanted to extrude this 5 feet. Well, all I have to do is type in a value of 5 feet and hit the enter key. So that extrudes this 5 feet into 3D. We can talk more about this in a future video if you would like. But the one other thing about this, and I'm going to make a copy over here. I'm going to rotate this using the rotate tool. Don't worry too much about that for right now. We'll talk about that in the future. Not only can you use this to add material, you can also use this to subtract material. So let's say, for example, I wanted to cut a door opening. I could tap the R key, single click, and draw on this face. Well, notice how these are two different faces. I could actually use the push-pull tool by tapping the P key, single click, move my mouse, and move this all the way to the back, and then click again. Well, notice what that did is that actually removed material from my object. So I could do the same thing by drawing an arc. So I'm going to tap the A key, single click, and then click again to draw an arc. Well, I can use the push-pull tool in order to extrude this back to remove material as well. So you can use this to cut holes or remove things, other things like that inside of SketchUp. So it's really easy. So I'm just going to move my mouse back here. I'm going to click again and notice how that cut a hole. Now, one thing to note about this is if you tap the P key and try to select this face, notice how you're going to get an error message. So the reason we're going to get an error message here is because this is a curved surface, meaning SketchUp can't push-pull it. So you can't push-pull curved surfaces with the native tools inside of SketchUp. Now, we can talk in the future about some extensions that do that, but for right now, just know that you're going to have a lot more success if you're pushing and pulling flat faces inside of SketchUp. All right, so this video is getting a little bit long, so I'm going to go ahead and shut this one down, and we will continue in the next video. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them below the video. I'd love to try to answer them. If you want to download my free keyboard shortcuts guide, you can do that at TheSketchUpEssentials.com/beginner. So if you want to download that so that you can kind of follow along and see where those different tools go on your keyboard, that's a great resource. Finally, if you want some additional SketchUp training, you really want to go in depth and take learning SketchUp seriously, you can check out my course at TheSketchUpEssentials.com/course. That's my comprehensive guide where I go start to finish all the way through SketchUp. So that's where you can really become a SketchUp master. So if you're interested in that, again, that's TheSketchUpEssentials.com/course. But as always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. I really appreciate it, and I will catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.